So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Buongiorno, benvenute e benvenuti. Welcome to this Zoom webinar. My name is Anna Maria Di Giorgio, and I'm the director of the Italian Cultural Institute in San Francisco. I'm particularly glad today to be here and to open this new webinar to celebrate Dante Alighieri's 700th anniversary with two special guests from San Francisco and Berlin, Furio Rinaldi, curator of drawings and prints at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, and Dagmar Korbacher, director of the Kupferstichkabinett Berlin, parts of the Städtisches Museum Berlin. Thank you both so much for being here with us today, and thank you, Dagmar. I know that for you is also dinner time in Europe, so double thank. Today's webinar is entitled Botticelli and Dante, the Drawings for the Divine Comedy. And this is a webinar that's a part of a webinar series curated by the Italian Cultural Institute in North America with the patronage of the Italian Embassy in Washington, D.C. So please, it's very important for me to underline that this series has been presented jointly, and I would like to thank personally my colleagues, Luca De Vito, IIC Chicago, Valeria Rumori, IIC Los Angeles, Francesco Darelli, IIC Montreal, Fabio Finotti and Paolo Barlera, IIC New York, Veronica Manson, IIC Toronto, Emanuele Amendola, IIC Washington. And a special thanks goes to our embassy in Washington, D.C. and our ambassador Armando Varricchio, who patronized this web series and for constantly supporting the activities of the IICs. Last but not least, let me thank our Consul General in San Francisco, Lorenzo Ortona, that is online with us today and would like to say a few words. Buongiorno, Lorenzo, please.
Buongiorno Anna Maria e buonasera ai nostri amici in Europa. I am particularly happy to be here today with you and support this wonderful webinar that has been organized here in San Francisco. I want to thank as well our two speakers today. As you mentioned, Furio Rinaldi, the curator of drawings and prints at the Fine Arts Museum, the Legion of Honor Museum here in San Francisco. He is a recent addition to the Italian community, and I will say a wonderful addition who arrived during this pandemic times and has already given a great contribution in webinars. And of course, thank you very much to Dagmar Korbacher, as you said, director of the Kupferstichkabinett of the Berlin State Museums, which is Germany's largest collection of prints and drawings. We're very honored to have you with us today. Thank you very much. It is an incredible webinar, I think, that has been put together today. The possibility of being able to hear two experts like Furio and Dagmar on the Sandro Botticelli cycle of the 93 drawings illustrating the Dante's Divine Comedy is really a very, very special occasion. The cycle, as we know, has suffered a divided history. And a part of the collection is in the Biblioteca Apostolica in the Vatican. The large part of it went to Berlin. So it has had a mysterious and complicated story, and I'm very eager to listen to Dagmar, and then of course to listen to Furio and his expertise and insight on these wonderful drawings. As Anna Maria mentioned, the main reason of these celebrations is that we are commemorating Dante in his 700th anniversary since the year of his death, 1321. And as Ambassador Varricchio said and outlined, Dante and his poetic vision represent a true heritage for humanity and an essential instrument of dialogue among countries. We think that it is particularly significant for us in the United States to celebrate Dante, who is so beloved all over America, because this year we are celebrating as well the 160th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between Italy and the US. So it's a very fortunate coincidence that we can celebrate our long-standing friendship through Dante and through his incredible works. I just want to recall that the embassy and the diplomatic network of consulates and of Italian cultural institutes in the US have foreseen over 60 events during the course of 2021, a cycle of virtual conferences on many different aspects of Dante's endeavor. I believe that this part of the cultural diplomacy that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs can offer around the world is very significant, especially today with the tools we have that we have reached, especially during this pandemic period, and really managing to put together the best of Italian academy, museums, and of course, experts from America in museums and academy. But this day in particular, we even have the fortune to have someone from Germany. This just shows what an incredible collaboration we are able to do from San Francisco now that we were able to have these incredible instruments like Zoom. I want to recall as well the collaboration with the Museum of Legion of Honor, where Furio works. We're very happy to announce as well that we are supporting the next exhibit that will open on May 7, dedicated to Pompeii. We are particularly happy to have this very close relationship with the Legion of Honor, and happy that the reopening of the museum on May 7th, after this long period of the pandemic, will coincide with an exhibit from Italy. Of course, it makes us very happy, and I'm sure it will bring a lot of joy to the people in the Bay Area and surroundings. Finally, allow me to recall the next webinar that we will do always on Dante with Anna Maria Di Giorgio. It's on May 12th, and it is called Dante Out of the Book, From Theaters to US Jails. I think it is very interesting to look at Dante under different lenses. Today, it's under the art history, and next time on May 12th, it will be through the look of inmates in American jails and how they have lived the word of Dante. So many different points of views, many different aspects. We're very lucky to have such an active Italian Cultural Institute in San Francisco. We work very closely together. And so we hope to see you at all the next webinars on Dante. But without further ado, I'm very excited to listen to our speakers today. Grazie a tutti, and have a very nice webinar.
Thank you so much. So, grazie davvero. Coming back to the webinar, Botticelli and Dante, the drawings for the Divine Comedy. As you may know, this is considered one of the Renaissance highest achievements in the fields of graphic arts, the Sandro Botticelli cycle of 93 drawings illustrating Dante's Divine Comedy. And it constitutes also one of the great master's most mysterious endeavors, as Lorenzo was saying. The cycle has suffered a divided history because 7 leaves are now preserved in the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana, and a larger group of 85 sheets was bought from the Duke of Hamilton for the Kupfertisch Cabinet of the Royal Museum in Berlin by its director Friedrich Lipman in 1822. So Professor Korbacher will outline the incredible journey and sensational sale of these rarely exhibited drawings, while Professor Rinaldi will illustrate what place the breathtaking Dante series plays within Botticelli's evolution as a painter and a draftsman. So Furio Rinaldi is curator of drawings and prints at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Most recently, Professor Rinaldi was associate vice president and specialist of old master drawings at Christie's, New York. And his curatorial experience includes positions in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's an expert on 15th and 16th century Italian drawings. He had co-organized and contributed to a number of exhibitions in Europe and United States, and extensively published on the subjects. At the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, he's currently curating the exhibition Color into Line, Pastels from the Renaissance to the Present, that's scheduled to open in October, and working on a book dedicated to the drawings of Sandro Botticelli. Dagmar Korbacher is the director of the Kupfertisch Cabinet of Berlin State Museum. She has studied art history, Italian literature, and classical archaeology at the Catholic Universities of Eichstätt and Milan. and her work experiences include positions at the Germanisches National Museum Nuremberg and Christie's Auction House in Amsterdam. She was appointed curator for pre-19th century Italian, French, and Spanish drawings and prints at the Kupferstichkabinett Berlin in 2010. And in this role, she has developed highly popular exhibitions, including one on 18th century print series called On the Edge of Reason in 2012, and on Botticelli's drawings of Dante's Divine Comedy and the Treasures of the Hamilton Collection in 2015 in Berlin. I was there, I had this luck. And in 2016 at the Courtauld Gallery, London, and most recently on Raphael in Berlin 2020. So before leaving our guest the floor, a quick note. At the end of the conference, Professor Rinaldi and Professor Korbacher will answer some questions we will received, and you can write a question in Italian or in English in the Q&A, and I'll collect them and moderate a bit. So now, with no further ado, I give the floor to Furio Rinaldi. Professor Rinaldi, up to you.
Thank you, Anna Maria, and thank you, Lorenzo, the consul, and all the consulate for the very nice introduction. I'll get right into the presentation mode. Here we are, and I'm very, very excited to be here with all of you, and happy to be here with all of you. With Dagmar, I am here with all the Dagmar bibliography on Dante. The Kupferstichkabinett in Berlin has done so much on this fantastic series of drawings. And I'll be happy to drop down the bibliographic reference in the chat so that people can take notes. Yes, while Dagmar will show and illustrate the fascinating divided history of this beautiful series of drawings, I am going to focus more on the art historical aspects of how these drawings were done and what kind of, what place they occupy within Botticelli's catalog and oeuvre. Of course, since we're celebrating Dante and in this beautiful lecture series, I just want to give a brief, outline of what we're talking about today, which is, of course, his most popular and renowned work, seen through the eyes of Botticelli. Dante's journey, as you know, began the Good Friday of the year 1300. It's a dreamlike vision narrated by the author, by Dante himself. He lost his way in a dark wood, as we all know. It's a metaphor for human ignorance and some sort of a spiritual unrest. And he embarked on a journey through the three realms of afterlife: the Inferno, hell, Purgatory, and Paradiso, paradise. In the first two worlds, is accompanied by the Roman poet Virgil, who symbolized human wisdom, while in the third one is led by Beatrice, who's Dante's youthful love interest, and in the Divine Comedy, she embodies the divine wisdom and some sort of a mythical allegory of faith. As you know, Dante wrote the comedy while he was in exile from Florence, and he died outside of Florence in 1321. Which became some sort of an issue and a problem for the Signoria of Florence towards the 15th century. Florence was ruled by the Medici. Their entire political agenda was pretty much to build up on the great identity, artistic and literal identity of arts and literature of Florence. So the fact that Dante died outside of Florence in exile, and the comedy was written during this exile, became some sort of shameful at the time. So this is some sort of the cultural context that sees the birth of Landino, Cristoforo Landino, commentary of the Divine Comedy, published in Florence in 1481, whose primary objective is really to reappropriate Dante to its Florentinità, to its Florentine identity, which was somewhat compromised by the many editions and commentaries that were done outside of Florence. To illustrate and kind of give a visual form to the illustrations that are accompanying Landino's edition, who was a better artist than Botticelli, who really was the primary artist of the Medicean family at the time. He was absolutely aligned with their political agenda and proved to be particularly good and had really a great sensibility for translating into visual arts the literary subjects or lyrical subjects, as we can see here from the iconic Primavera in the Uffizi. So the illustration of Landino's edition, the engravings, that project kind of fell through. Only 19 engravings were produced out of the 100 that should have been done. But Botticelli embarked on a larger and even more challenging task of illustrating the entire comedy with drawings, with large-scale drawings, executed, drawn on single sheets of parchment. You can see I put the measurements here. They're very, very large. 40, almost 50 centimeters wide. So unlike the engraving illustrating Landino's edition, which I showed before, these are not mere illustrations ancillary to the text. They're large size, the landscape format, which is very innovative for that time, separated from the text, makes them self-sufficient, self-sufficient images that do not adjust to the written word, to Dante's text, but have their sort of autonomy to it. The sheets are, to give you some sort of structure, every sheet is organized with a drawing written on the smooth part of the part, and the written text, as you can see in the illustration here, right, on the back. So here you can see the structure and how the drawing is done. On the front, on the recto, on the smooth part of the parchment, we have the pen and ink drawing. And on the back, the written text. The written text pertains to the previous canto. So the way that it's built is that one could read the text and see the related illustration on top of it. So this is extremely important and extremely innovative for within the history of the illustrated Divine Comedy, because the drawing, as I said, does not adjust to the text, but it's a self-sufficient large image. Some drawings, most of the drawings are in pen and ink over a stylus under drawing. We get more in detail to the technique, and some are colored in gouache, as we can see here in the beautiful drawing in the Vatican for the Inferno 15. The broad, especially, I want to discuss briefly what the difference is in style and how Botticelli's style adjusts to the different cantos. For the Inferno, as we can see here, the broad landscape, the horizontal landscape really gives some sort of a disorienting perspective on Dante's journey. And the slow pace is emphasized, the crowded scenes, really a reflection the arduous and inescapable journey of the damned souls and of Dante with them. In this case, we are in the Malebolgia of the burning sands, where the sodomites are condemned, and in these scenes, Dante, in a touching moment, meets his teacher, his first teacher, Brunetto Latini, whom he meets, recognizes him here at left. And you can see that here Dante's figure is left in an unfinished state. It's not drawn in red as the other two. Another beautiful scene, of course, the one from the Malebolgia. Malebolgia are these evil pockets where the souls are punished. In this case, is the punishment for the evil counselors, especially political counselors. And they are condemned in burning into flames. And as Dante and Virgil are walking through it, they hear some voice, and Dante realize that the voice is coming from one of the flames. But Botticelli takes the liberty of really visualizing this voice coming from the flame, the stream of flames, by drawing a really elegant and with great synthesis, the outline of a profile, which is the profile of Ugo da Montefeltre, who speaks to Dante and Virgil, of course. Another beautiful drawing, one of the most beautiful ones at the Kupferstick Cabinet, the Inferno 18. This is the punishment of the seducers, the flatterers. And it's interesting because it really gives you a very clear sense of the narration format adopted by Botticelli, where the couple, Dante and Virgil, are repeated several times throughout the same scene. It's some sort of it's considered, scholars have considered this some sort of an outdated narrative, which was taken from medieval manuscripts, from a previous illustration of the Divine Comedy, the purpose of which, of course, is to give some sort of unity of action within the same landscape. However, as one can see here, the same format was used in Botticelli's time, not only in his manuscript, but also in fresco cycle, in very important and large-scale fresco painting cycles, such as Filippo Lippi, Stories of St. Stephen, in frescoes in the Cathedral of Prato. Lippi was Botticelli's teacher, and the frescoes in Prato are possibly the ones where Botticelli was working on as well, and as a very, very young artist. And here we can see that we have 4 different episodes from the life of St. Stephen narrated and illustrated within the same, context and spatial setting. Moving on to Botticelli's own work, independent work as a fresco painter. These are, of course, his frescoes in the Vatican. Today, by the way, is the Natale di Roma, is the birthday of Rome. So happy birthday to Rome. And Botticelli adopts the same format, where we see Moses and episodes from his youth, to be specific, narrated throughout the scene in a unified space. So this is exactly what he then adopted in the drawings for the Divine Comedy, and but also it has some precedence to the in the works on paper format, as we can see here from a drawing by Maso Finiguerra. Finiguerra was a pupil from the an artist from the workshop of the Pollaiolo brothers, who were highly influential for Botticelli, especially as a draftsman, I would say. And this is a large drawing showing episodes from the Genesis. The drawing is in Frankfurt, again showing different episodes in the same sheets, in the same spatial setting, in some sort of a unity of action, on drawing, on a parchment drawing. So just like what Botticelli will do a few years later. Moving on, slowly moving further in Botticelli's narration, we get to the Purgatory. Purgatory is the style of the Purgatory is more, I would say, more organized. Botticelli gives better understanding of the topography of the spaces. We don't have those disorienting, crowded scenes. Everything is a little less crowded, a little bit more clear and organized. We have here a clear rendering of the mount of the Purgatory, which is based on Domenico di Michelino fresco in the Cathedral of Florence. So kind of announcing, you know, Botticelli's journey, giving a preview of what Botticelli's journey will be during this canto. Again, we see here scenes from the Purgatory, Purgatory 5 in this case. This is when the souls kind of notice that Botticelli's figure does cast a shadow, which means that he's human, and so everybody's surprised and they're really drawn to him. And you can see it compared to the figures from the Inferno. The figures are much more proportionate, and there's a different sense of anatomical understanding and kind of less abstraction compared to what it was done before. I also want to highlight here a detail of the drawing which shows a double Botticelli's use of ink, of two different hues of ink, one which is a lighter gray, lighter brown ink, and darker one. And scholars have also speculated on why Botticelli used two different hues of two different colors of brown ink. Is this a stylistic choice? Is there a meaning? What it was trying to say? Perhaps the areas that were meant to be in light are on a lighter ink, and the dark scenes are with a darker. I don't know. It seems very random to me, and I think it was just very plainly running out of ink and using another one on the same sheet. At the time, ink was, of course, artisanal. It was the iron gall based ink, which, depending on the iron concentration of the iron, gives a different color. So that would explain, I think, just the difference of the use. And of course, we get to the Paradise drawings, which are my favorite in a way, and where Botticelli really give full expression to the vision, the heavenly vision of Dante by means of pure outlines. Usually he adopts this centralized scheme and structure where Dante and Beatrice are pulled at the center of the different heavenly spheres. In this case, Beatrice towering, always slightly larger than Dante. She is illustrating to him the origins of the moon shadows in a totally metaphysical way. And also we see a scheme, a structure of the different planetary spheres, the celestial spheres. Here, a increased dynamism as the figures are really pulled towards the high heavens. Fantastic moment where Dante and Beatrice are, they lift up and they leave the earthly paradise with this beautiful sequence of trees, which is really remindful of Botticelli's botanical sensibility that we saw in the Primavera. And an increased luminosity also. There are no shades. The drawings are just pure outlines. They kind of become heavenly. Their bodies become made of the same heavenly substance that Dante describes. In a very beautiful passage, Dante describes that he felt like water takes in light. That is really what heaven and is made of. And Botticelli translates this in a very, very effective way. Not only that, but the technical execution of the metal point redrawn, gone over with pen and ink is really here used in a functional way to translate again the dynamism of the two figures. It really enhances the ethereal substance of their bodies, and the silvery quality of the metal point. It's really so perfect to define the heavenly quality of Beatrice, especially, that we can see here caught in this beautiful pentimento, in this change of pose, looking upwards and then looking down to Dante. So how much of this was left visible on purpose by Dante and not is very difficult to say. I think it was a deliberate choice, but we'll get to that in a minute. I just want to also emphasize how this technique, metal point and pen and ink on parchment, was used in Botticelli's workshop at the time he was drawing the Divine Comedy. We see here a drawing by Giuliano da Sangallo. It's a beautiful circular design from Madonna and Child with Angel, executed exactly in the same way as the Dante's drawings, with an incredible control by the ink by Giuliano, which really makes me question whether perhaps he was helping Dante in going over with the ink on some of the weakest drawing from the series, because the quality varies from drawing to drawing. And I'll be curious to hear from Dagmar perhaps later. Getting a little bit to the chronology of the drawing. So this entire sequence for the Dante series really improves Botticelli's stylistic development as a draftsman, especially in his confident use of pen and ink, masterfully controlled by Botticelli, compared even to his contemporaries, as we can see here in this beautiful drawing for St. Thomas receiving the girdle, which is in Milan. It's almost like the pen never leaves the paper. It's all one incredible line that defines this figure in profile, kneeled and in profile. The Dante series also cemented and announces Botticelli's late style from the mid-90s, which is all done and expressed by exaggerated gesture, a strong mystical sense of spirituality. This is a moment where Savonarola, came under the sway of the magnetic Dominican preacher Girolamo Savonarola, of course. So it really, the making of the Dante drawing coincides with the arrival of Savonarola in Florence, and Botticelli was particularly drawn to him. Botticelli's brother was a follower of Savonarola, and he became too ultimately. To put this on a larger perspective, so what was Botticelli painting at the time of the drawings for Dante? And I think that large altarpiece is most important public altarpiece done at that time, in that time frame, the coronation of the Virgin for San Marco, now in the Uffizi, really epitomizes Botticelli's late style, and also in its strong spirituality, the influence that the Dante drawing were having on him. I chose here a detail of the beautiful angel that you see in between the Virgin and incoronated Virgin. The angel stands behind the rays of light, which have some sort of physical substance, a physical presence, almost like a curtain. And these are absolutely solutions that we saw in the drawings for the Paradise, that they have this, the planetary spheres, the light has this physical presence and in visual presence, which Botticelli translates also in his paintings. The painting dates from circa 1492, which I also believe it's a little bit the threshold of the execution of the Dante drawing. And here we can see I put together the sequence of the fathers of the church in the Dante drawing set right next to the sequence of saints in the San Marco altarpiece. Also, by the way, a very, very important and innovative altarpiece, because it's for the first time it reunites, you know, the lower part with the saints, with the higher part of the, you know, where the miracle with the religious scenes happen. Also, from drawing to painting, kind of linking the two and trying to connect the Dante drawing, not as an isolated endeavor as they were usually considered, but something that really lives with Botticelli as a constant reflection within Botticelli's work. Here, how the seated figure of Dante kind of is recurring in several of his paintings, like the Tondo here with the Holy Family and St. John the Baptist in Buscott Park, which is where the same figure is represented in the seated figure of St. Joseph. And also how the Dante drawing announced Botticelli's future development and really extremely late works in their extreme expressiveness, sentimentalism, pathetic sense of spirituality, as we can see here in the Pentecost, painted probably 1505, if this is the work that Botticelli was commissioned by the friars of Montelupo, and it's to be identified with the Pentecost now in Birmingham. Where we can see here as a, you know, it's a typical example of the late Botticelli with the, you know, linear abstraction of the figure, total disregard of what are the common rules of perspective and proportion especially. So really Botticelli is an artist that as a draftsman and as a painter goes against the grains of what is commonly considered the evolution of the Renaissance. That's why it was deeply misunderstood. And it's always interesting to go back to him with different perspective. And also how the Dante drawings were perhaps used by his workshop or seen by his workshop and used for other motifs. There's this little known panel in Hanover, another great German collection, which shows an Annunciation with a devout kneeled at the front, and both elements are really taken directly from one drawing from the Divine Comedy, as you can see. And I really want to thank Bastiane Clercy for pointing out this painting that I didn't know before. So even the workshop is somewhat nurtured by these images and the Dante drawing, which becomes some sort of catalog of images to be used and reused. What's the legacy of the Botticelli's drawing for Dante? Of course, you know, they became, I think, you know, they are the inspiration behind the many other Dante drawings that were produced in the 16th century. I show here probably the most famous one by Federico Zuccaro, also in the Uffizi, these large drawings in red and black chalk. Every drawing illustrates a canto, so pretty much the same format as Botticelli's. But even more than this, I would say that the Botticelli's drawings are really at the beginning of this incredibly rich tradition of drawings illustrating long epic poems or even religious subjects in a series. And I bring here example, especially dating from the 18th century, Fragonard series of drawings for Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, William Blake, who was particularly committed to illustrating literary works, Paradise Lost and many others. In this case, I wanted to say that drawing that is here in San Francisco illustrating the compliant of Job for the book of Job, which he also worked on, and Domenico Stiepolo, who produced, I believe, like 250, 300 drawings illustrating the Bible, the entire Old Testament and New Testament. So this not to be engraved or not to be reproduced, just for as drawings. So totally understanding Botticelli's looser use of drawing for a looser representation of the literary works, and that kind of, I don't know, almost the unfinished and always in the making aesthetic of that a drawing can project. It's particularly suited to represent literary works and written works. The last aspect that I think it's important to emphasize and to discuss is the drawing's unfinished state. Vasari unceremonious, the unceremonious treatment of Botticelli's work for Dante in Vasari's life kind of dictated the misfortune of this, especially of this commission for the artist. Vasari implies that Botticelli lost a lot of time to complete the series, almost lost his mind, and he lost many missions, some sort of a disgraceful event in Botticelli's life, and which is, scholars have also emphasized the fact that it's unfinished, that it's kind of roughly done as an expression of this, troublesome and problematic making. However, I think we should completely take this thing upside down, and we should see the unfinishedness, the non finito aesthetic of this fantastic drawing as anticipation and announcement of the great examples of non finito in painting, in sculpture, and in drawing that will be epitomized and celebrated later on by Michelangelo and Leonardo. So in this perspective, I think Botticelli was really the first step to a completely new aesthetic that we can now all appreciate. And now I'm gonna switch to Dagmar's presentation. Give me a second.
Thank you, Furio.
Sure.
I use the the technical pause and to thank Anna Maria. Or Anna Maria, did you want to?
No, please go ahead and say.
I'm sorry. So I think my audio is a bit delayed, but I hope it works. So if you don't hear me anymore, Anna Maria, I don't know, call me or whatever. So thank you, Anna Maria, for the kind invitation, and it's really fantastic to be able to have this conversation on Dante and Botticelli with you and Furio tonight or today, which is for you. So how actually did these drawings end up in Berlin? And Furio, if you could switch to the next slide. This is a question. I don't see the next slide. Okay. Well, how did the drawings end up in Berlin is a question I actually very often get asked, mostly by Italian friends, of course. And the answer, or rather the story and the history behind this is quite interesting or even dramatic. And I have to admit that I sometimes think about how the story of these drawings could be transformed into a Netflix. So, however, let's start at the very beginning with Botticelli's client, Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici. And that's on the next image. Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici commissioned the Dante drawings, probably as a precious book. The thing is, apparently he didn't receive it right away or within a year's time or so. Apparently, Botticelli took quite some time thinking about and drawing meticulously, as Furio showed you, every event in every single canto of the Commedia. And it is very possible that it took him almost 2 decades to nearly finish it, or to at least bring these drawings into the state of non finito, how we know them today. So we actually don't know if Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici ever received the drawings, and more, we don't know anything about the whereabouts of these works of art between Botticelli's workshop and the late 18th or early 19th century. Of course, there's some speculation or even the possibility that they had been brought on a diplomatic mission as a gift to the French court as early as the turn of the 16th century. But as I said, it's not much more than speculation. What we do know is that around 1800, so this is 300 years later, 300 years of darkness in the history of these drawings later, they turned up in Paris. They were in the possession of Giovanni Claudio Molini, an Italian, a Florence-born bookseller who owned quite a famous shop in Paris and had many top-class clients. I just like to mention an example, one of these clients, which our American friends might find interesting. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the United States, returned to Molini's shop in Paris several times to buy various books. So how do we know that Molini owned the Botticelli drawings? And as you can see on the next slide, at the time, these drawings, Furio, can you switch to the next slide, please? At that time, these drawings were bound as a book. And this binding was not the original binding anymore, but it was a binding which was made at the end of the 18th century in France. And in front of the volume, and on the next slide, you see it more clearly. Furio, you can see this list, and this list is rather a contents description. And this list was compiled by Molini on 27th of April in 1803 in Paris. We have no information on whether Molini imported the drawings from Italy, like he did with other books, and it seems very possible that he purchased them somewhere in France. This list looks to us very much like a handover certificate, and we can only assume that Molini made it when he sold it to one of his clients. And this client was Alexander Douglas, Marquis of Douglas and Clydesdale, the 10th Duke of Hamilton. And you can see him on the next slide, a portrait. Over the years, the Duke had acquired numerous bibliographic treasures and accumulated a huge library. And apparently the Duke was quite proud of his treasures because he seemed to have enjoyed showing them to single visitors at Hamilton Palace in central Scotland near Glasgow. On the next slide, you can see Hamilton Palace. It doesn't exist anymore. It was destroyed in the 1920s. And on the next slide, you can see an image of the library. Among the visitors must have been the Scottish painter William Dyce, as you can see on the next slide, because this painting from the 1840s representing Dante and Beatrice shows very clearly that he must have known Botticelli's drawing of Paradise 1, and Furio has showed you this drawing already. So this is one of the earliest examples of how these drawings inspired other artists. But let's take a step back and a slide onwards. Furio, can you switch? Thank you. I had mentioned the 300 years of darkness in the history of these drawings. practically we don't know anything about their whereabouts between 1500 and 1800. How could this happen? How could such spectacular artworks remain in the dark for 3 centuries? There may be several reasons. One of them, of course, is that they are relatively small and relatively hidden. And as drawings, and I think Furio will agree, they had never been intended for the admiration by a larger audience. The main reason for their dwelling in darkness, however, must have been the fact that the artist Botticelli was almost forgotten during these centuries. So the rediscovery of the drawings actually coincided with the rediscovery of the artist itself, or in other words, with the rediscovery of the drawings in the Hamilton collection came the task of finding out if they were by Botticelli and why this mattered at all. Let's take a look at the cover of the volume, which was in the late 18th century, so before this rediscovery started. And on the
Dagmar, sorry, we have some problems in hearing you. I'm asking Furio if he can hear you well or not. Maybe.
Okay.
Furio, can you hear Dagmar, or it's a problem for everyone? Yeah.
Dagmar, can you try speaking?
Sorry about this.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for the interruption.
I'm sorry. So we're here with this inscription, and the inscription claims that the drawings were by Botticelli, also quite vaguely. So it's complete with a spelling error in the artist's name. It says by Botticelli or another artist of the Florentine school. And as you can imagine, it seems rather unlikely that this attribution was based on any connoisseurship or critical analysis of the drawing style. At this time, and actually well into the 19th century, works of art that looked in some way Florentine or simply out of the ordinary or just a bit strange were attributed to Botticelli. This at first rather slow and cautious approach to identifying the artist of the drawing reflects the already growing critical appreciation for Botticelli's work, which has grown in intensity over the course of the century. Most interesting, I think, is that while approaching or trying to define Botticelli's artistic personality, art critics like Walter Pater and John Ruskin demonstrated his profound affinity to Dante. Not so much through these drawings, of course, but because Vasari mentioned him commenting on Dante and the comedy. The art critics recognize Botticelli as the embodiment of the poetic painter and the peerless illustrator of Dante. So it is also this association with Dante that raised Botticelli's status within just a few years from that of a secondary painter to that of an artist of the highest rank. And by the 1880s, these drawings were considered the high point of Botticelli's oeuvre and the finest gem of Hamilton Library. And if you could switch to the next slide. And this is where the Berlin museums enter the scene. 3 decades before, in 1850, Gustav Friedrich Wagen, then director of the Berlin Gemäldegalerie, had visited Hamilton Palace and this library, which you see here, and the Duke had shown him his treasures, among them the Dante drawings. And I think it is very interesting what Wagen writes about these drawings, because he thinks not as a collector, but as a museum person with the public in mind. He says, the publication of facsimiles of a selection of them in woodcuts or lithography, now so easily accomplished, would be highly welcome equally to the lovers of Dante and of Italian art. Let's see what happened next. The collection was taken good care of not only by the 10th Duke, but also by his son, the 11th Duke of Hamilton. But times changed when the grandson of the collector and art lover who had assembled the treasures became the 12th Duke of Hamilton. And you see him on the next slide. Oh, sorry, this is, yeah, okay. The 12th Duke of Hamilton didn't care for art at all, but he had a very expensive lifestyle, and unfortunately, he had a passion for dog and horse racing. So all this brought him into severe financial difficulties, and as a consequence, he was forced to sell his collections. In January 1882, a short note in the newspaper The Times stated that there would be an auction of all these treasures, including the Dante drawings, later 1882. Given the background of Botticelli's rediscovery as a significant Renaissance artist, this note raised quite some interest, and it is hardly surprising that an art museum such as the Kupferstichkabinett should take a special interest should take a special interest in this treasure of the Hamilton Library. While in Britain, Prime Minister Gladstone suggested in a letter to the private secretary to Queen Victoria to attempt to purchase these drawings from a museum in the United Kingdom, the museum people in Berlin had very much the same idea. And one of these museum people was Friedrich Lipman, which you see on the next slide. Friedrich Lipman, Anna Maria mentioned this in her introduction, was the director of the Kupferstichkabinett at this time. He was firmly committed to securing the Botticelli drawings for his museum. Although he was not a Botticelli specialist in the strictest sense, he was a great admirer of Renaissance art. Lipman's diplomatic skills played a crucial role during negotiation. He was extremely well connected in Great Britain. His wife was English. He had many British friends. So after the first viewing of the drawings, which had been brought to London for the auction, Lipman remained in London and set about negotiating the purchase. The first plan was to buy the Dante drawings before the auction and not risk a fierce bidding battle. However, the seller, the 12th Duke of Hamilton, must have been quite desperate at that point, because he would accept only an offer for the entire manuscript collection, including over 700 valuable manuscripts. So it was all or nothing. And as you can imagine, the Royal Museums of Berlin hesitated whether a purchase of this kind should even be considered. The astronomical asking price of nearly 80,000 pounds sterling, equivalent to around 1.5 million marks at the time, which would be today 15 million euros or $18 million, was scaring. But the prospect or the risk of losing the Dante drawings entirely made the Berlin museums take the decision. They would go ahead and attempt the acquisition of the entire collection. Frantic attempts were made to pull together resources because, of course, the budget of the museums was tiny also at that time. And they tried to raise enough money for the purchase, which was only possible because the German emperor advanced some of his private money as a loan. What happened in England while the Germans were busy negotiating? Following the note that the Hamilton collection was coming up for sale in January 1882, John Ruskin, the leading English art critic, had launched an appeal to raise enough money to purchase the most important pieces for a national museum in Britain. It's a sort of crowdfunding campaign he had in mind. But his plan failed, probably because the public did not have any idea or clear understanding of what the library and hence the auction actually contained. There were just some vague descriptions and no images available at the time. Some more detailed descriptions, and I show you this on the next slide, was to be contained in the auction catalogue. It describes the Dante volume as lot 201 on page 31. It says Dante Alighieri Commedia, and further on it says it contains 88 exquisitely beautiful designs by Sandro Botticelli. However, the auction catalogue was printed, but it never saw publication. The scheduled auction never took place. A copy of the catalogue, which was effectively publisher's spoilage, served as the handover certificate. This copy of the catalogue is still kept in the Kupferstich cabinet as documentation of the purchase. The Berlin museums had managed to buy the entire library secretly before the scheduled date of the auction. On November 2nd, the Times' German correspondent broke the news that the Hamilton manuscripts had been brought to Germany, where museum staff, as the correspondent put it, were rubbing their hands in glee. The British art world reacted with shock to the news. The loss of the Hamilton manuscripts and the Dante, precisely when contemporary tastes in art had shifted towards venerating Botticelli, was seen as a tragedy, as a national scandal. However, quite soon the atmosphere shifted, because one recognized that this coup had brought works of art from a private collection to a public authority. The manner in which the Kupferstich cabinet made its newly acquired treasures accessible to experts and public alike succeeded in winning back the esteem of the British art world. Following their delivery between October 30 and November 1st, 1882, the treasures of the Hamilton collections were laid out on tables at the Kupferstich cabinet. Specialists were able to undertake detailed studies of individual works, which were then put on public display for an exhibition that lasted from early December. So just 1 month after their arrival in Berlin, they went on public exhibition from early December 1882 until the end of May 1883. The volume of the Botticelli drawings was dissolved because Lipman was concerned that the constant turning of pages, because everyone, of course, wanted to see it and leave it through, would quickly damage the drawings. You can see on the next slide how they are mounted still today. The pages were mounted onto single mounts, passe-partout, and this is how they survive still today. And it's still the original mounts in which they were put in 1882. Lipman very quickly produced a facsimile edition of the complete series featuring actual size collotype plates. The before mentioned exhibition and publication of these facsimiles allowed him to respond to the public's desire to see the treasures at the earliest opportunity. One of these facsimiles was in the possession of the British painter Edward Burne-Jones, who hated the size because it was not really manageable. But ultimately, Edward Burne-Jones found some very positive words about the attempts of the German Museum to make these drawings accessible to the public. And this is my favorite quotation of everything that has ever been written about this drawing, because he says about these drawings, a bigger treasure exists not, and dragons of dismal slimy dukes no longer brood over it. Blessings be on the Germans sometimes. Could you show the next image? Thank you. So that was the rather turbulent story how Botticelli ended up in Berlin, and the further history of the Botticelli drawings in the 20th century in Berlin was quite turbulent as well. The collection had been split up and relocated during the Second World War, and it remained divided during the partition of Germany. And it was eventually reunited in 1994 with the opening of the Kupferstichkabinet's new building at the Kulturforum. The custom-made boxes in which the drawings are kept are witnesses of this post-war era. The drawing happened in West Berlin, the other part in East Berlin. In West Berlin, the boxes you see at the left-hand side of the image were stored in open shelves. So this is why these boxes are slightly discolored, and the other boxes, which you can see on your right, that were kept in East Berlin, are not discolored. So with the last slide, Furio, grazie. To conclude, I would like to underline that the history of these drawings is not merely about collecting, and it is not merely about Italy or Italian art. It is a history of the transition from private to public. It is a history which starts in Italy but embraces large parts of Europe. It is therefore a history of cultural identity. And I think it is our responsibility as museums not only to make these drawings available digitally or in the flesh, but it's our responsibility to make them matter as parts of our cultural identity, which goes beyond the borders of nations and the walls of museums. And I think a wonderful proof how art, poetry, and culture can connect us even across oceans is tonight's or maybe today's webinar. So I thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, Dagmar, for this amazing presentation. Thank you, Furio, so much. We have many questions, but we were a little bit maybe too long. So we have, I think, 5 minutes to answer all these questions. And one question is, how do contemporary scholars know or confirm that Botticelli himself made all the drawings and not artists in his workshop? What characteristics of the drawings lead for sure to the conclusion they are Botticelli's? Furio.
Drawing is almost like handwriting, you know, it's like a fingerprint. It's such an intimate, direct expression of an artist's ideas and style. It cannot be really misinterpreted other than his own. Although Botticelli had an extensive workshop from the really beginning of his career, and the workshop practice was really inherent to his artistic activity, we all agree that the Botticelli drawing, the Dante drawings, are a full expression of Botticelli alone. You can see it from the fantastic underdrawings, the vitality of the underdrawing in metal point throughout the series. There's such an incredible strength and dynamism that really pertains only Botticelli. I don't know if what Dagmar, you know, Dagmar lives with this, as the luxury of living with these works every day, so she knows them by heart.
Dagmar?
Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree with you, Furio. The other question is about the color. Only, as Furio said, only 4. And I think there was also another question about the color. Only 4 of these drawings are totally or in parts colored, and they're actually, well, it was colored in Botticelli's time, and the sheet of Inferno 18, the color is very differentiated. You showed you this sheet and very sophisticated. They would think this may be by Botticelli himself. The color on other drawings it seems a bit different, or even from a different hand. So this is still some questions among scholars, but yeah, but the drawings, yeah, and yeah, it's one. This series of drawings is one of two works that Botticelli actually signed somehow with his name. So we are quite sure that they are Botticelli.
So other two questions are on the color of the images and the pigments that have been used, and the historical significance of these pigments for the time being, and so, and also if Botticelli colored the image himself, or it was a later edit. Yes, he colored himself, I think, but I leave you the word, Furio.
Yes, it seems like the colored ones were done, you know, there's such a unity and consistency in execution. Also, the fact that some were left unfinished, you know, I think leaves no doubt that it was Botticelli himself also adding the colors. Schulze Al-Kappenberg, who published, there are a lot of questions about the books and if these drawings are published. They are, yes, and you know, look them up. It's Botticelli's drawings for the Divine Comedy, year 2000. It was published in English and in German and in Italian too. It's Schulze made also good, very significant references that it's the same palette used, the same enameled palette used by Botticelli in some of these late works, like the Calunnia and Uffizi. So even the color spectrum, it's really the same. And these are gouache, colored in gouache, which is, you know, watercolor pigment mixed with white lead, which gives the more painterly covering effect, much more than a watercolor. And perhaps Botticelli didn't go through it, or, you know, this is really a vexated questions, why they're not colored, why they're not, so, you know, they have this unfinished appearance. But perhaps Botticelli wanted to leave this kind of open narrative and open understanding to, you know, and give a more subtle and sophisticated appearance to the work, rather than making it look like a medieval illumination, which would have been the result for a completely colored thing.
Thank you, Furio. I would say last questions. Do you want to pick one among the five you see here in the chat?
I'm reading. Why did Botticelli remain out of taste for 3 centuries? Very interesting questions, and absolutely. And I think the rediscovery of the manuscript that Dagmar said, and the appreciation that the pre-Raphaelites and that the entire British culture, artistic culture had at the time of the rediscovery of the Hamilton manuscript brought Botticelli back, and that kind of aesthetic and sensibility. Why did it go out of fashion? It's I don't know. It's interesting how fashion changes, even for art. Botticelli was very much in demand during the 80s and early 90s, and then there's a progressive decline when other artists and different vision and aesthetics take over in central Italy. There's the famous passage of Isabella d'Este when she's, you know, the famous Marquis of Mantua, when she's seeking painters to decorate her camerino, and her assistant brought up names. So there's this one and there's this one, and of course, you know, she wants Leonardo. That, you know, snobbish. She said, absolutely not. I only do, you know, important things, and Bellini. She wants Giovanni Bellini, and Bellini said, "No, I'm not doing." They're all trying to avoid, Isabella's demands and requests, and the assistant said, "Well, there's also Botticelli in Florence, renowned. He was really at the top of his game, and." No, because he was out of fashion, he automatically gets excluded by Isabella, who wanted only painting in fashion, in high demand. So the decline of Botticelli is attested already in his own time.
Sorry, I was reading other questions that are coming and coming.
Yeah. Many questions. I saw one that says, "How did the drawings ended up in San Francisco?" The drawings are not
in San Francisco.
Unfortunately, they're not.
Dagmar, a question is there a virtual tour available for the Kupferstich cabinet?
Yes, you can have a look on our website. There are yes, or I can send them to you, Anna Maria, and you can circle. There's a tour, or yes, a little tour about these drawings on Google Arts and Culture. Yeah.
So it's in the official Kupferstich cabinet website.
Yes.
Okay, I will try to write it down while you maybe can answer the last question, last questions. So I have the time to write the link down for everyone. Furio or Dagmar, if you see.
We can choose. We can.
Yeah. You can choose a question. Really the last one. I'm sorry, but.
Okay. I would choose the question by so few of the drawings ended up in the Vatican. Is that okay with you, Furio?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's originally that these drawings must have been 102 sheets. So one for every canto, the title, a double sheet. As I said, the history of these drawings is in darkness. What we do know that 7 of these sheets in the middle of the 17th century, in 1632 to be exact, were in the library of a Parisian collector, and they went from there to the Christina of Sweden, and from there to the Vatican through 2 cardinals, and so by so few, well, we don't know. At some point in the history before 1632, the entire collection must have been split up, and well, this happens, and actually, we are very glad that Botticelli was so unknown and forgotten, because it happened for the Raphael drawings. They were cut out. The paper was split. Of one drawing were made 3 or 4, just to have more of these drawings to collect, and so yeah.
Thank you very much. Dagmar, we have problems in hearing you again, but I really wanted to thank you so much. You're okay. It's the beauty of being here live on Zoom. But in any case, I really wanted to thank you once again for being with us today, Furio, Dagmar. This has been an incredible presentation. I thank our Consul General once more. Thanks to my colleagues in North America. Thanks to our embassy in Washington, D.C. and to the more than 400 people who connected with us today from Italy, Germany, US, Canada, showing this incredible interest. And before going, I would also like to remind you 2 important future webinars on this Dante series. So on May 4th, the IAC Washington will curate the presentation of the Metamorphosis of Beatrice, Love and Justice from Dante's Vita Nova to the Commedia by Professor Marco Veglia, Whereas on May 12, the Italian Cultural Institute San Francisco will host a webinar called Dante Out of the Book, from African-American writers to theaters in US jails, with Professor Valerio Capozzo and other guests. So please follow our website, YouTube channel, social network, Instagram, subscribe to our newsletter to always keep up to date. And I hope this webinar has offered you a short pause from worries and anxiety in these complex times we are all living in. So please stay safe, enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you very, very much. Thank you, Furio. Thank you, Dagmar. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
And yes, thank you so much. Also to my colleagues in Berlin that I can read are following our website. Bye.